You think you can tell me what to do? Don't act like you're smarter than everyone else. You have no clue. Excuse me, young lady, but I've seen more law before breakfast than you'll ever know, so don't talk to me like that. You are. You're just sitting there playing judge like you're some genius, but you don't know a damn thing about what's really happening here.
The moment Vanessa Carter stepped into the courtroom, the air seemed to shift. Every eye in the room turned toward her, noting the careful precision of her outfit, the confident grip on her folder, and the smug expression that suggested she had already won before even stating her case. Cameras rolled silently, capturing every subtle movement, every flicker of emotion that passed across her face. The audience leaned forward in anticipation, sensing that today's proceedings would be far from ordinary. Vanessa, like many who came before her, had underestimated the quiet authority of Judge Harper, a woman whose reputation for dismantling arrogance and revealing truths was as well known as the grand oak doors of the courthouse itself. Vanessa's case, on paper, appeared simple, a dispute over a failed business contract where she claimed financial loss due to alleged mismanagement by her former partner, Elaine Richards. The details, though technical, were complicated enough for someone unprepared to stumble over every question. But Vanessa had prepared, or at least she believed she had. Weeks of research, countless notes, and endless rehearsals in front of mirrors had convinced her that she could outsmart anyone in that courtroom. She had studied Judge Harper's previous cases, analyzed her questioning style, and even practiced projecting the perfect tone of indignation and confidence. In her mind, she was untouchable. The courtroom itself was silent but electric, filled with a tension that only real-life stakes could generate. Judge Harper entered with a calm, commanding presence, acknowledging the courtroom with a nod that seemed to weigh heavier than any spoken word. She scanned the case file in front of her, a small smile forming at the corner of her lips as she recognized the type of litigant she was about to confront. Experience had taught her that people like Vanessa thrived on theatrics and confidence, mistaking volume for validity. Today, however, she was ready to demonstrate that preparation, evidence, and calm authority would always outmatch empty arrogance. "Miss Carter," Judge Harper began, her voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge of authority. "You are suing Ms. Richards for financial losses resulting from an alleged mismanagement of your partnership. Please explain exactly what occurred, starting from the beginning." Her eyes locked onto Vanessa's, a silent challenge that demanded clarity and honesty. The room leaned in. Even the camera operators seemed to hold their breath. Vanessa launched into her story with the kind of dramatic emphasis usually reserved for stage actors. "Your Honor, this is not just a matter of numbers. This is about betrayal, incompetence, and blatant disregard for professional integrity. Ms. Richards completely mishandled our accounts, causing me a loss of tens of thousands of dollars. I have meticulously documented every discrepancy, and I'm prepared to prove that her negligence is undeniable." Her voice rang with confidence, yet beneath the practiced tone, a slight tremor betrayed the anxiety she tried so hard to mask. Judge Harper listened patiently, her expression neutral but her mind working rapidly. She had already reviewed Vanessa's paperwork and noted multiple inconsistencies small enough that a casual observer would miss them, but glaringly obvious to someone trained to detect falsehoods and exaggerations. She waited for Vanessa to continue, knowing that the combination of arrogance and overconfidence would soon lead to critical errors in her argument. Vanessa continued, unaware of the trap being laid. She began referencing documents she had printed from various online sources, assuming that any mention of legal precedent or financial analysis would bolster her credibility. She gestured toward her folder with exaggerated care, flipping through pages as if revealing a master plan. The audience could sense the growing tension. What Vanessa considered evidence appeared increasingly flimsy under Judge Harper's calm scrutiny. Every claim, every pointed finger, every rhetorical flourish was catalogued in the judge's mind for later dismantling. Then came the first mistake, a subtle but significant one. Vanessa, in her eagerness to impress, began making sweeping generalizations about Elaine's character rather than focusing on the concrete evidence. Anyone with basic understanding of business ethics would see that Miss Richards has a history of reckless decision-making, she said, her eyes scanning the audience as if seeking validation. The courtroom shifted uncomfortably. Seasoned spectators recognized the telltale sign that a litigator had crossed from argument into personal attack. Judge Harper's gaze sharpened, the subtle warning flicker in her eyes signaling that the first cracks in Vanessa's armor had appeared. "Miss Carter," she interjected smoothly but firmly, "I am interested in the facts of this case, not your interpretation of Miss Richards' character. Please stick to the events that led to the alleged financial loss." Her tone was calm, but every word carried the weight of decades of experience, and the courtroom felt the silent impact of authority. Vanessa faltered briefly, a subtle blink betraying her confidence. But she quickly recovered, doubling down on her performance. "Your Honor, with all due respect, it is impossible to separate her behavior from the outcome. Her actions, or lack thereof, directly caused the discrepancies I've highlighted." The words spilled out in rapid succession, and for a moment, it seemed as though her strategy of overwhelming with volume might work. Judge Harper, however, remained unshaken. Her mind had already processed the inconsistencies, and she knew precisely how to proceed. "Miss Carter, please point to the specific actions that directly caused a financial loss. Provide dates, figures, and documented evidence. Generalizations and assumptions will not be sufficient." Her eyes locked on Vanessa's, a challenge framed not in anger, but in precision. The audience could feel the shift, the courtroom energy pulsing as the first layer of Vanessa's confidence began to crumble. As Vanessa rifled through her folder, producing document after document, Judge Harper's calm yet piercing questions began to unravel the narrative. Small discrepancies in dates, unclear references, and assumptions that weren't backed by factual documentation became apparent. Each error was met with a subtle but precise question from the judge, cutting through Vanessa's theatrics. The audience watched in growing anticipation, sensing that the initial arrogance that had entered the room, unchallenged, was slowly being dismantled piece by piece. Asterisk by this point, Vanessa's gestures had become exaggerated, her voice rising slightly as she attempted to maintain control of the narrative. But the more she emphasized, the clearer it became that her preparation had relied more on style than substance. Judge Harper, noticing every detail, allowed moments of silence to linger, making Vanessa increasingly aware that her performance alone would not suffice. The courtroom held its collective breath, the tension almost tangible. Then a subtle but devastating pivot occurred. Judge Harper referenced a document Vanessa had relied upon heavily, exposing that the source was outdated and irrelevant. The calm precision in her voice contrasted sharply with Vanessa's escalating panic. "Miss Carter," she said, holding the document for all to see, "this evidence is not current, and it does not support your claim. I suggest we focus on verifiable, factual information rather than assumptions drawn from unrelated sources." The courtroom reacted, sensing the first clear blow to Vanessa's overconfidence. Vanessa's hands shook slightly as she tried to flip through more papers. Her rehearsed confidence began to crack under the weight of factual scrutiny. She attempted to interject, but Judge Harper's controlled presence dominated the room. "You will have your opportunity to speak," the judge said sharply, "but please do not interrupt the proceedings with conjecture. Stick to the facts, or your argument will fail." The words hung in the air like a warning, charged with authority and the promise of inevitable accountability. At that moment, the first hints of genuine fear began to appear in Vanessa's eyes. She realized, perhaps too late, that this courtroom was not a stage for performance, but a place where truth, preparation, and evidence were king. The arrogance that had carried her into the room now became a liability, each misstep catalogued by the judge's unerring attention. The audience watched, riveted, as a woman accustomed to dominating conversations and intimidating authority. Figures began to confront the limits of her control. By the time Vanessa reached the midpoint of her argument, the atmosphere had shifted completely. The courtroom, once filled with anticipation of a confident performance, now thrummed with suspense as spectators waited to see if she could salvage the situation. Judge Harper's calm precision had transformed the energy from curiosity to tense expectation. Every gesture, every document, every word Vanessa uttered was under scrutiny, and it was increasingly clear that the unfolding drama would not end well for her. Vanessa's voice grew louder, more frantic, as she tried to explain discrepancies that were now clearly her own misunderstanding rather than Elaine's mismanagement. Judge Harper's questions became sharper, each one a scalpel cutting through layers of illusion. The audience sensed the inevitability of a turning point, a moment where arrogance would meet experience, and the truth would emerge with unyielding clarity. By the end of the morning session, Vanessa had not only failed to convince, but had unwittingly set the stage for her own unraveling. Her confidence, once impenetrable, was now fractured. Judge Harper's meticulous attention had exposed gaps, inconsistencies, and overconfidence that no amount of theatrical display could repair. The audience left the courtroom buzzing with anticipation, knowing that the next session would be decisive, a confrontation between arrogance and authority that promised suspense, drama, and a lesson that Vanessa would not soon forget. The courtroom had barely settled after the morning session when Vanessa Carter returned, her composure visibly shaken despite her attempts to appear calm. The hallway outside had offered no comfort. Whispers from onlookers, a few sympathetic glances from her legal team, and the unrelenting replay of her earlier missteps weighed heavily on her mind. Vanessa tried to adjust her jacket and straighten her notes, but every movement seemed mechanical, a thin veneer over the anxiety brewing beneath. She had walked in thinking this case would cement her superiority, but reality was proving to be far harsher than she had anticipated. As she re-entered the courtroom, cameras immediately honed in on her, capturing the subtle tremor in her hands and the slight hesitation in her stride. Judge Harper sat poised, reviewing her notes, her expression calm but unreadable. The audience, now fully engaged, sensed that the true test of Vanessa's composure was about to begin. Every eye in the room was drawn to the contrast between Vanessa's forced confidence and the quiet authority radiating from the bench. This was more than a case now, it was a psychological battlefield. Ms. Carter, Judge Harper began, her voice even and measured. We are resuming the proceedings. You will have the opportunity to present your evidence clearly and succinctly. Please ensure that your statements are factual and directly relevant to the financial discrepancies you claim. The words were simple, but they carried an unmistakable weight, a reminder that theatrics would no longer shield Vanessa from scrutiny. Vanessa cleared her throat, attempting a smile that did not reach her eyes. She opened her folder and began, her tone sharp but tinged with an undercurrent of fear she could not fully conceal. Your Honor, I have compiled the exact transaction records, emails, and financial statements that prove Ms. Richards' negligence. Each discrepancy is documented with dates, amounts, and context. I am confident this evidence clearly supports my claim. Her voice was steady, yet her fingers fidgeted with the papers, betraying her nerves. Judge Harper's gaze sharpened, and the courtroom held its collective breath. The judge took one of the documents Vanessa offered and examined it with meticulous care. Ms. Carter, while these records are helpful, several entries appear to have been altered or misstated. Can you explain why these inconsistencies exist? The question landed like a precise strike, exposing the first critical vulnerability in Vanessa's argument. Vanessa faltered, her mind racing. She attempted to respond with a practiced tone. Your Honor, I assure you, these records are accurate. Any discrepancies are minor and do not affect the overall financial loss caused by Miss Richards' mismanagement. But Judge Harper's eyes narrowed, piercing through the words, and seeing the cracks in her story. The audience sensed the shift. Vanessa's earlier confidence was evaporating, replaced by a rising tension that made each moment more suspenseful. She shuffled papers, muttered under her breath, and glanced at her legal team for support, but the calm, unwavering scrutiny from the bench left her feeling exposed and vulnerable. Judge Harper, aware of the psychological strain, allowed brief moments of silence to linger, heightening the suspense and forcing Vanessa to confront the reality of her unpreparedness. Minor discrepancies? Judge Harper interjected, her tone cool but edged with authority. Miss Carter, some of these documents are critical to your claim. Errors or alterations, intentional or not, undermine your entire case. Can you provide original, verifiable evidence for these entries? The courtroom was silent. Even the softest whisper seemed amplified in the tense atmosphere. Vanessa's throat tightened, and for a split second, she could not find her voice. Desperation began to seep into her performance. She flipped through more papers, attempting to locate the proof she had meticulously prepared, but every document seemed less convincing under Judge Harper's scrutiny. Your Honor, I have the originals at my office, she stammered, her voice faltering. I can provide them if necessary. The hesitation was fatal. The audience could see that her previously rehearsed confidence was dissolving into panic. Judge Harper leaned forward slightly, her gaze unyielding. Miss Carter, this courtroom does not accommodate excuses or delays when you have chosen to present evidence. If you are unable to substantiate your claims with verifiable current documentation, your case will suffer accordingly. The warning was clear, and Vanessa felt the full weight of authority pressing down upon her. Every moment of overconfidence and dismissive attitude from the morning session now compounded the pressure. Vanessa's legal team whispered urgently, but she waved them off, determined to maintain control despite her growing fear. She turned back to Judge Harper, trying to salvage the argument. Your Honor, if I may, I want to highlight the pattern of mismanagement, the repeated errors that led to the financial loss. But Judge Harper interrupted, her voice sharp, slicing through the narrative like a scalpel. Miss Carter, the pattern is irrelevant if it cannot be substantiated with concrete, verifiable evidence. General claims of mismanagement without documentation are insufficient to support your case. Asterisk, the audience reacted subtly. Seasoned. Viewers recognized the methodical dismantling of Vanessa's argument. Each question, each pause, and each redirection by Judge Harper was carefully designed to expose gaps, test credibility, and highlight the weaknesses in Vanessa's case. The tension was palpable, and even the most distracted spectators leaned forward, captivated by the unfolding drama. Vanessa's composure continued to erode. Her hands trembled as she shuffled papers, her voice grew sharper and more defensive, and her earlier rehearsed lines seemed hollow against the precision of Judge Harper's questions. Your Honor, I have emails and statements showing her negligence. She began, but Judge Harper's cutting gaze silenced her mid-sentence. Miss Carter, the judge said, her voice calm but steely, the emails you reference are incomplete and taken out of context. Context is everything in a claim of financial mismanagement. Present them fully and accurately, or your argument will fail. The courtroom hung on every word. The suspense was unbearable. Vanessa's panic was no longer subtle, it radiated from her every movement, every faltering word, every anxious glance at the audience. She took a deep breath, trying to regain control. Your Honor, I've documented everything meticulously. I am confident that when presented fully, the evidence will clearly show Ms. Richards' responsibility. Her attempt to assert confidence was weak. Even she could sense the cracks in her voice betraying her fear. Judge Harper's gaze did not waver. Confidence without verification is meaningless, Miss Carter. This courtroom requires facts, evidence, and integrity. Not assumptions, not theatrics, not rehearsed indignation. If your evidence cannot withstand scrutiny, your case will fail. The weight of the statement pressed down like a physical force, and Vanessa felt it acutely. The audience could almost see the tension wrapping around her like a vice. Panic began to edge into desperation. Vanessa's gestures became frantic. She flipped through pages, her voice rising in volume, trying to dominate the narrative. Your Honor, this is clearly an intentional misrepresentation. I have records, receipts, and email chains, but Judge Harper, with an almost imperceptible shift in posture, interrupted, cutting through Vanessa's chaos with surgical precision. Miss Carter, presenting a disorganized collection of documents does not constitute evidence. Each claim must be verified, relevant, and logically supported. You have failed to do so consistently. You have had ample opportunity to organize and present your case. The responsibility is yours. By now, Vanessa's confidence had completely dissolved. Her earlier smirk and self-assured posture were gone, replaced by visible trembling and a desperate need to regain credibility. The courtroom sensed the shift. Fully the spectacle of arrogance giving way to anxiety, the tension between unearned confidence and hard-earned authority reaching its apex. Asterisk, Your Honor, she said, voice quivering now. I just won't make sure the truth is seen. She caused the loss. Please understand that. Her words, unpolished and fragmented, highlighted the disparity between her initial overconfidence and her current vulnerability. Judge Harper's calm stare did not soften. Instead, it seemed to focus more intently, examining the exact moment where arrogance met accountability. The courtroom waited, breathless, as Vanessa's unraveling continued. Every gesture, every halting sentence, every faltering explanation amplified the suspense. The audience was caught between anticipation and awe, knowing that the next few moments would determine whether Vanessa could salvage her dignity or succumb entirely to the force of Judge Harper's authority. By the time the morning session ended, it was clear Vanessa had survived, but only barely. The foundation of her argument had been shaken, her overconfidence dismantled, and her credibility undermined. Judge Harper's methodical approach had exposed the weaknesses, leaving Vanessa to face the consequences in the afternoon session, a confrontation that promised to escalate the tension, test her emotional limits, and potentially deliver the first real signs of a dramatic courtroom meltdown. The courtroom was quieter than usual when the afternoon session began. Vanessa Carter returned, her confident facade now almost entirely stripped away. Each step she took toward the bench felt heavier than the last, weighed down by the subtle but unmistakable tension that had built throughout the morning. Judge Harper, sitting poised and unflinching, glanced briefly at her notes before raising her gaze to Vanessa. The eyes that met Vanessa's were sharp, unyielding, and full of quiet authority. Every person in the audience sensed that something significant was about to happen, the tipping point in a clash between arrogance and absolute judicial control. Vanessa clutched her folder tightly, flipping through the documents with trembling hands. The organized, rehearsed narrative she had practiced countless times in front of mirrors seemed impossible to recall. Her voice, once steady and commanding, now carried hints of desperation. Your Honor, she began, I've brought the complete evidence this time. Every email, receipt, and record is verified. You will see that Ms. Richards is completely responsible for the losses. She tried to meet the judge's gaze, but it was like looking into a mirror of unshakable authority, a reflection of every flaw in her own preparation. Judge Harper's calm voice cut through the rising tension. Ms. Carter, I will examine the documents you provide. But remember, accuracy and relevance are paramount. Any attempt to mislead or present incomplete information will be addressed immediately. The warning, delivered with quiet precision, landed like a hammer. Vanessa felt the weight of every word, realizing that her every misstep could now lead to public humiliation and legal defeat. As Vanessa began to present her evidence, it became immediately apparent that her preparation had been more about style than substance. Her documents, while numerous, contained gaps and inconsistencies. Dates were misaligned, figures contradicted earlier statements, and key emails were missing context. Judge Harper's sharp, analytical mind picked up on each flaw instantly, and she began to ask pointed questions, each one dismantling a segment of Vanessa's argument. Miss Carter, the judge began, her tone calm but cutting. This email chain you reference ends abruptly. Can you explain why there is no follow-up or confirmation of the transactions you claim? Vanessa's hands shook as she rifled through her papers, trying to locate some justification. I must have misplaced it, Your Honor. It's somewhere in my files, she stammered. The audience gasped subtly at the admission, understanding how catastrophic such an oversight was in a courtroom where credibility is everything. Judge Harper's eyes narrowed slightly, a signal that she was ready to escalate the scrutiny. Misplacement of critical evidence is not a minor oversight, Miss Carter. It undermines your entire case. You are asking this court to rule in your favor based on documents you cannot fully account for. Do you understand the gravity of this situation? The weight of the words pressed down on Vanessa, and she realized that her previous confidence had been nothing more than a fragile illusion. Vanessa attempted to regain control, her voice rising in urgency. "Your Honor, the evidence exists. I've documented everything meticulously. I can provide the originals if necessary. Please allow me the chance to present them fully." Her hands waved dramatically over the scattered papers, a stark contrast to the calm, collected authority of Judge Harper. The audience felt the tension spike, sensing that Vanessa's panic was becoming more visible and more dangerous to her case. Judge Harper's response was deliberate, her words slicing through the tension like a scalpel. "Miss Carter, you have had multiple opportunities to organize your case. The court does not operate on hypothetical or incomplete evidence. Present what you have clearly and accurately now, or your claims will be considered invalid." The courtroom fell into silence, the suspense almost tangible. As everyone awaited Vanessa's next move, frustration and fear began to overwhelm Vanessa. Her gestures became erratic, her voice rising into an almost pleading pitch. "Your Honor, I am telling the truth. Ms. Richards' actions caused the financial losses. I have records, emails, receipts." Her sentence was interrupted by the judge's firm tone, cutting through the hysteria. "Ms. Carter, presenting documents without verification or context does not constitute proof. Your reliance on unsubstantiated claims weakens your credibility and your case." The audience can now see Vanessa's unraveling in real time. Her previously polished demeanor had crumbled entirely, replaced by visible panic and desperation. Her hands shook as she tried to organize the papers, her voice cracked, and her eyes darted around the room, searching for some unseen lifeline that might restore her confidence. Judge Harper's measured calm only amplified the contrast, making Vanessa's emotional turmoil all the more apparent. Vanessa, refusing to yield, attempted to press forward. "Your Honor, I have the evidence. It's all here. Please, just allow me to show it." But Judge Harper's gaze intensified, a quiet storm of authority and judgment that made the room feel charged with electricity. "Miss Carter," she said slowly, each word deliberate, "your presentation lacks structure, accuracy, and relevance. The court requires clarity and verifiable evidence, not theatrics. You are running out of opportunities to substantiate your claims." The room was silent except for the rustling of papers and Vanessa's increasingly desperate voice. She realized that every gesture, every misstatement, and every gap in her evidence had been cataloged by the judge. The calm, controlled authority of Judge Harper was systematically dismantling Vanessa's overconfidence. Every attempt to recover only made her appear more vulnerable, and the suspense in the room was almost unbearable. Vanessa's panic began to translate into anger, a dangerous mix that only served to expose her further. "Your Honor, you're not understanding the situation. I've documented everything. She is lying and hiding the truth." Her voice cracked, and her hands flailed over the disorganized stack of papers. The audience recoiled slightly, witnessing the collapse of a person who had entered with unwavering arrogance, now teetering on the edge of total emotional breakdown. Judge Harper's voice remained calm but unmistakably firm, delivering the first real strike to Vanessa's unraveling composure. "Miss Carter, this courtroom is not a place for outbursts or emotional theatrics. You will present the facts clearly, or the court will have no choice but to rule against you. Your anger does not constitute evidence. Only verifiable, relevant documentation can support your claim." The words hit with the force of inevitability, and Vanessa's shoulders slumped slightly, a physical manifestation of her diminishing control. Sweat began to bead on Vanessa's forehead as she fumbled through her folder. Each paper seemed less certain than the last, and each attempt to explain a discrepancy only drew sharper scrutiny from Judge Harper. The tension in the room was now almost suffocating, as everyone could sense the climax of this confrontation drawing near. The audience leaned forward, silent but attentive, as the unraveling drama unfolded. Desperation crept into Vanessa's tone. "Your Honor, I just want to be heard. She caused this. Please, I need justice." Her voice trembled, a mixture of fear and frustration. revealing the raw humanity beneath her previously polished arrogance. Judge Harper, maintaining her composure, leaned forward slightly and allowed the words to hang in the air. The pause was intentional, forcing Vanessa to confront the stark reality of her position. The courtroom was not on her side, and theatrics could no longer substitute for facts. Finally, Judge Harper addressed the critical issue directly, delivering a blow that would define the remainder of the session. Miss Carter, based on the documents you have presented and the inconsistencies within them, the court cannot consider your claim credible at this time. You have failed to provide sufficient, verifiable evidence to support your allegations. Do you understand the consequences of this failure? The question hung in the air, a sword suspended over Vanessa's aspirations. Vanessa's face paled as she realized the full magnitude of the situation. Her earlier confidence, rehearsed arguments, and meticulous planning had crumbled under the weight of factual scrutiny. The audience could see the transformation, a woman who had entered with smug certainty now trembling, pleading, and on the brink of complete humiliation. Asterisk by the end of the afternoon session. Vanessa had survived, but only barely. Judge Harper's methodical approach had exposed the gaps, inconsistencies, and overconfidence that threatened to derail the entire case. The tension had escalated to near breaking point, and the stage was set for the decisive confrontation in the next session, a showdown where arrogance and desperation would collide fully with authority, precision, and justice. The following morning, the courtroom was charged with an almost tangible tension. Vanessa Carter entered, her usual air of superiority completely replaced by a tight-lipped determination that barely concealed her inner panic. Every step she took toward the bench was heavy, measured, as though she were stepping into a battlefield she could no longer control. Cameras were rolling, the audience silent but fully aware that something extraordinary was about to unfold. Judge Harper's eyes met Vanessa's with an intensity that made even the most composed spectators hold their breath. Vanessa opened her folder with trembling hands, attempting to retain control of the narrative. "Your Honor," she began, her voice wavering slightly, "I have reorganized the documents. Each email, receipt, and statement is now cross-checked and complete. I can show beyond doubt that Ms. Richards caused the financial losses." Her words carried a desperate conviction, but the calm, unwavering authority emanating from Judge Harper immediately challenged that claim. Judge Harper leaned forward, her hands clasped, eyes scanning the room before settling on Vanessa. "Miss Carter, the court will examine these documents, but remember, accuracy is paramount. Any attempt to misrepresent information will be addressed immediately. This is your final opportunity to present your case clearly and credibly." The weight behind her words was unmistakable, a reminder that theatrics and emotion would not substitute for fact and verifiable evidence. Vanessa began to lay out her evidence, carefully presenting emails, bank statements, and screenshots of transactions. Her hands shook, betraying her nerves, and her voice occasionally faltered as she attempted to maintain composure. The judge examined each document meticulously, pausing occasionally to scribble notes and scrutinize dates and figures. The audience was spellbound, sensing the high stakes and the psychological pressure Vanessa was under. "Ms. Carter," Judge Harper began, her tone calm but cutting, "some of these emails appear altered. There are gaps in the communication threads, and several receipts lack corroborating evidence. Can you account for these discrepancies?" Vanessa swallowed hard, trying to summon confidence she no longer felt. "Your Honor, the originals are at my office. I can provide them immediately," she said, her words coming out in a rush. The response was met with a brief, piercing silence. Judge Harper's voice, steady and unyielding, cut through the tension. "Miss Carter, this court cannot base its ruling on unverified claims. If you cannot substantiate your assertions now, the credibility of your entire case is compromised. Present what you have clearly and accurately, or accept the consequences." The words were precise, a measured strike that left Vanessa momentarily speechless. Her frustration began to bubble over. She shuffled papers frantically, her tone growing defensive. "Your Honor, I've documented everything meticulously." She intentionally concealed information. This is clear evidence of negligence. The courtroom seemed to tighten, the suspense mounting as the judge's gaze bore into her with unrelenting precision. Judge Harper's response was deliberate, cutting through Vanessa's escalating emotions like a scalpel. Miss Carter, claims of intent or negligence are meaningless without substantiated proof. Speculation, accusations, or unverified documentation do not constitute evidence. Present facts, not assumptions or emotion. The audience felt the weight of the authority in the room, watching as Vanessa's desperation became more pronounced, that the tension reached a breaking point. Vanessa's voice rose, quivering with a mix of panic and defiance. Your Honor, this is outrageous. I have spent weeks preparing. You clearly don't understand the situation. Judge Harper raised a hand, silencing her instantly. Miss Carter, this courtroom is not a stage for tantrums or dramatics. I require clarity, relevance, and verified documentation. You will not speak over the court. The silence that followed was suffocating, emphasizing Vanessa's growing vulnerability. The audience could see the cracks widening in Vanessa's composure. Her hands trembled as she attempted to reorganize her notes, her voice now shaky and pleading. Please, Your Honor, just allow me to show the evidence. She is responsible. I have proof. Judge Harper's eyes did not waver. Miss Carter, you have had ample opportunity. Present your evidence clearly, or the court will proceed without considering your claims. This is your final chance to substantiate your case. Vanessa's panic now translated into anger. She slammed her folder on the desk, scattering papers across the courtroom floor. This is ridiculous. You can't dismiss me without reviewing the evidence fully. I know what I'm talking about. Her voice cracked, the desperation becoming more visible. The arrogance of the previous sessions replaced by raw fear. Judge Harper's calm, authoritative tone cut through the chaos. Miss Carter, your theatrics are irrelevant. The court requires verified evidence, not outbursts or self-assured assumptions. Your failure to present organized, substantiated proof reflects on your credibility, not mine. If you cannot support your claims, the ruling will be in favor of the defendant. Vanessa's face flushed, a mixture of embarrassment and fury overtaking her. She looked around the courtroom, desperate for some show of support, but only found the silent, attentive audience and her legal team, who could do little beyond offering whispered suggestions. Her attempts to maintain authority were crumbling rapidly under the relentless scrutiny of Judge Harper's methodical dismantling of her case. Every attempt to assert herself only deepened her exposure. She gestured wildly at the scattered papers, her voice rising into a pleading yell. You have to listen. This is evidence. She caused the loss. Please. Judge Harper leaned forward slightly, her voice low and commanding, a thunderous calm that carried across the room. Miss Carter, I have heard you. You have failed to provide sufficient, verifiable evidence. Your outbursts and dramatic gestures do not constitute proof. The court cannot and will not rule in your favor based on speculation or incomplete documentation. The audience felt the climax approaching. Vanessa's hands shook as she realized the inevitability of her defeat. Tears threatened to form, a stark contrast to the confident, poised woman who had entered the courtroom days earlier. Her breathing became rapid, her movements more frantic, and every eye in the room was on her as the tension reached its peak. Vanessa's voice broke, trembling with a mixture of fear and frustration. Your Honor, I've documented everything. Please, you have to understand. Judge Harper's eyes locked onto hers with unrelenting intensity. Miss Carter, understanding requires facts, not dramatics. You have failed to present credible, verifiable evidence. Your claims are dismissed. The ruling stands in favor of the defendant, with full court costs awarded. The gavel came down with finality, echoing through the courtroom. Vanessa's entire body slumped, her earlier bravado completely extinguished. Papers lay scattered around her, a physical representation of her shattered composure and failed case. The audience was silent for a moment, absorbing the magnitude of the spectacle. The courtroom had witnessed not just a legal defeat, but a complete emotional unraveling as she sat there. Trembling and overwhelmed, Vanessa's mind raced through the humiliation. Her social media boasts, the rehearsal of arguments in front of mirrors, and the smug certainty of her own intelligence all had collapsed under the methodical precision and authority of Judge Harper. Every expectation she had built was shattered, leaving only a raw, vulnerable, and deeply humiliated figure before a silent courtroom. Judge Harper's voice, calm and measured, delivered the final words of the session. "Let this be a lesson, Miss Carter, and to all who enter this courtroom. Authority and evidence matter more than arrogance and assumptions. Respect the process, or face the consequences." Vanessa's shoulders sagged as she absorbed the reality of the judgment, the weight of authority and the finality of her failure, pressing down like an immovable force dot by the time the courtroom emptied. Vanessa's world had shifted irrevocably. The aftermath of this session promised social scrutiny, public judgment, and personal reflection unlike anything she had anticipated. The spectacle of her unraveling, broadcast for all to witness, had cemented the story as a dramatic, cautionary tale about arrogance, preparation, and the uncompromising force of judicial authority. The courtroom had settled into a tense, anticipatory silence as Vanessa Carter slumped in her chair, her confidence all but obliterated. The gavel's echo from the previous session still lingered in the minds of everyone present. Judge Harper remained poised, an embodiment of calm authority, scanning the room as if measuring the weight of each person's reaction. Vanessa's hands shook as she gathered her scattered papers, trying desperately to regain even a semblance of composure. But it was too late. The damage had been done. The emotional toll, evident in her trembling lips and glazed eyes, had marked the beginning of her public humiliation. Vanessa attempted to speak, her voice quivering with the remnants of defiance and desperation. "Your Honor, I just want to clarify. I have more documents, emails." Judge Harper's gaze cut her off instantly, sharp and unyielding. "Miss Carter, the court has examined the evidence you have presented. The inconsistencies, omissions, and speculative assertions render your claims unsubstantiated. Any additional materials must have been available earlier to be considered. The court will not tolerate further delays or excuses." The words struck with surgical precision, leaving Vanessa momentarily frozen, her previous sense of control evaporating entirely. The audience could feel the tension spike. Every observer sensed that Vanessa's final attempt at redemption was slipping through her fingers. Her earlier arrogance, the smirk she had worn like armor, had been replaced with raw vulnerability. Her shoulders sagged, and her breathing became shallow as she realized the futility of her position. Judge Harper's courtroom was not a stage for theatrics. It was a chamber of accountability, and Vanessa was painfully aware that she had overestimated her own cleverness. Vanessa swallowed hard, her voice rising with a mix of pleading and incredulity. "Please, Your Honor, I've worked tirelessly on this. I can prove that Ms. Richards was negligent. You have to consider." Judge Harper's hand rose slightly, her eyes narrowing with calm authority. "Ms. Carter," she said, each word deliberate and cutting, "your claims have been considered. The evidence presented lacks credibility and consistency. This court cannot and will not rule in your favor based on incomplete or speculative documentation. The ruling in favor of the defendant is final." The room seemed to hold its collective breath. Vanessa's face flushed crimson, a mixture of anger, fear, and disbelief washing over her. She looked around, as though searching for some ally or escape, but the audience's expressions ranged from awe to disbelief. Her lawyer shifted uneasily in his seat, clearly aware that the situation had spiraled beyond legal argument into public spectacle. Vanessa's attempt to control the narrative had backfired completely, leaving her exposed on a national stage. Her hands trembled as she clutched her scattered papers, desperation and humiliation intertwining. "Your Honor, this is absurd. I have concrete evidence. How can you dismiss it?" The tone of her voice, once commanding and filled with self-assuredness, had cracked under the relentless scrutiny of Judge Harper. The courtroom remained silent, the suspense almost unbearable, as the judge prepared to deliver the final blows of authority. Judge Harper's voice, calm but unrelenting, cut through the charged air. "Ms. Carter, evidence must be verifiable, relevant, and complete. Your submissions have failed on all 3 counts. Assertions, uncorroborated claims, and theatrics cannot override the lack of credible documentation. The court has a responsibility to administer justice based on facts, not on inflated confidence or unchecked emotion. The ruling in favor of the defendant, including full court costs, stands. Vanessa's face went pale. The weight of the judgment hit her like a physical blow. Her designer blouse, her carefully styled hair, and her meticulously curated demeanor could not shield her from the reality she now faced. Tears welled in her eyes as she realized that her social media boasts, her meticulous rehearsals, and her sense of superiority had all been dismantled in front of millions of viewers. Every step she had taken to assert dominance in the courtroom had backfired spectacularly. Her breathing grew shallow, and her voice softened to a trembling whisper. I can't believe this. I followed the law. I did everything right. The courtroom watched, captivated by the transformation. The woman who had entered with a sense of untouchable confidence was now reduced to pleading, broken and utterly humiliated. Every gesture, every word, every tear revealed the crushing impact of accountability meeting unchecked arrogance. Judge Harper's gaze softened slightly, not with sympathy, but with the measured authority of someone who had seen this unfold countless times. Miss Carter, respect for the judicial process is not optional. Arrogance, disregard for evidence, and theatrics will not secure justice. Let this experience serve as a reminder. Accountability is real, and actions have consequences. Vanessa's body shook as she attempted to compose herself. Her papers lay scattered across the courtroom floor, a visible testament to the chaos of her defeat. The audience could almost feel the weight of her humiliation, every eye glued to the scene as the finality of the judgment sank in. The courtroom had become a stage where the consequences of entitlement were displayed in their rawest form. Her attorney leaned in, whispering hurried advice, but Vanessa could barely focus. Her mind raced through the past weeks of preparation, social media boasts, and self-assured proclamations, all shattered in the cold light of judicial authority. Her earlier anger and defiance had crumbled, replaced by a deep, gnawing understanding of how far she had miscalculated. Judge Harper continued, her voice steady and commanding. Court costs are awarded to the defendant in full. Miss Carter, you are dismissed from this courtroom. Take a moment to reflect on the consequences of your actions and the importance of integrity, respect, and preparation in any legal matter. The gavel came down, resounding like the final punctuation of a dramatic saga. Vanessa's hands covered her face, and she slumped forward in her chair, the emotional collapse complete. The courtroom was silent for a moment. Then murmurs of astonishment spread as the audience processed the magnitude of what had just occurred. Every gesture, every outburst, every failed attempt to assert control had been meticulously recorded, broadcast, and etched into the memory of those present as she was escorted from the courtroom. Vanessa's sobs echoed softly, a stark contrast to the confident woman who had entered. Her social media accounts, once filled with braggadocio, were now poised to become a record of her public humiliation. The viral potential of the session was undeniable. Clips would circulate widely, shared with captions emphasizing the consequences of arrogance, entitlement, and disrespect for authority. Outside the courtroom, the media began to speculate and report, the narrative of Vanessa Carter's meltdown spreading rapidly. The clip of her unraveling, juxtaposed with Judge Harper's unwavering authority, became an instant sensation. Social media exploded with reactions ranging from schadenfreude to admiration for the judge's composure. Vanessa, once the architect of her own narrative, had become a cautionary tale, a viral symbol of the cost of hubris. In the following days, Vanessa's community and social circles began to recognize the widespread attention her case had garnered. The humiliation was compounded by the public visibility of her defeat. Judge Harper's methodical handling of the situation was praised widely, reinforcing the lesson that preparation, respect, and accountability were non-negotiable in any forum, legal or otherwise. Vanessa's story captured in every moment of suspense, drama, and emotional intensity had come to a definitive end. The courtroom had not only rendered a judgment, but had also delivered an unforgettable lesson in humility and respect. The consequences of her actions, arrogance, unverified claims, and disregard for authority had been made manifest, leaving her a figure of caution, reflection, and public fascination. The moral of the saga was clear: no amount of preparation, confidence, or arrogance could substitute for facts, integrity, and respect for the judicial process. Vanessa Carter's journey through the courtroom had shown, in vivid and unforgettable detail, that accountability is inevitable and justice is impartial. The final scene, marked by her sobs, the scattered papers, and the judge's calm authority, would be remembered as a powerful example of why respect, preparation, and humility are essential in any serious endeavor. By the end of the session, the courtroom had witnessed a masterclass in authority, composure, and justice. Vanessa Carter had learned a lesson that would resonate far beyond the confines of the courtroom. When arrogance meets accountability, the results are both swift and unforgettable.